What's your favorite scary movie? With that one question, the landscape of the slasher subgenre and horror was forever changed. And today I'm going to tell you about where the slasher genre was before the release of Scream and then how it was forever changed after its release. To really appreciate what Scream did, we need to understand what horror, and more specifically the slashers, looked like leading up to its release. And we will begin with the 1978 release of Halloween, which, by all accounts, the movie should have failed. According to Jason Bailey from the website Vulture, every major studio at the time rejected Halloween, leaving the director John Carpenter to self distribute the film. But following the positive reviews and a strong word of mouth, the movie became a financial hit, with the website Box Office Mojo reporting a $47 million return on a budget of $325,000 during its initial theatrical run. And the studios were noticing the demand, and they tried to create their own successful slasher series, such as the Friday the 13th, released in 1980, and A Nightmare on Elm Street, released in 1984. For a time, the audiences couldn't get enough of the simple formula that was laid out. Endless sequels were created, and by the time that Scream was released in 1996, Halloween had six movies in the series. Friday the 13th had nine, and then A Nightmare on Elm Street had seven. So, with that many movies being put out in such a short amount of time, the creativity really started to suffer, and that excitement was completely gone. When you went to the movies, you knew you were about to see another copy and paste of every single slasher that you've seen before. You have the tropes, the cliche characters, such as the final girl, who was this innocent and pure virgin who survives the killer by running away most of the movie, and then somehow in this big battle at the end comes out on top. Then you have the group of friends that lacked personality or depth, which included the jock, the nerd, the promiscuous best friend, and then the stoner. And then, of course, you add the villain, which was this masked, almost superhuman killer that could be shot, stabbed, blown up, decapitated, or frozen in some cases, only to reappear in the countless sequels to torment another group of bland characters. The formula became predictable and boring, and each of these series that were once juggernauts had taken a hit. Alex DeVincenzo highlights the decline in the box office sales, reflecting this shift in attitude. The genre was beginning to be seen as cheap and lazy, and you enter Scream, released December 20th, 1996. Which was written by Kevin Williamson and directed by Wes Craven, who also created the original Nightmare on Elm Street films. Initially, it looked like it was just to be another exhausting, run-of-the-mill teen slasher movie, but the audiences quickly learned that this movie was unlike anything that they've ever seen before. It was smart, it was funny, and most importantly, it was self-aware. It didn't follow the slasher rules, it talked about them. Scream was one of the first horror films to be aware of horror films. The characters in that movie referenced other horror movies such as Halloween, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Prom Night, Friday the 13th, and then they even discussed the rules of survival, such as don't drink, don't have sex, and then never say I'll be right back. The self-awareness gave horror a new layer of intelligence. The opening scene alone let audiences know that this movie wasn't playing around. If you were to judge by all the advertisements and promotions before the release of Scream, that movie had Drew Barrymore as the lead star, and Drew Barrymore's star power alone was sure enough to draw audiences in. But within that first 12 minutes, Drew Barrymore was murdered, gutted, hung up from a tree for her parents to find her just seconds later. And Michael Lane with the Lewis Lit Journal he explains that the villain referred to as Ghostface in the movie was a killer who realistically stumbles a bit while trying to murder the characters one by one. In other words, he's saying that this isn't some huge superhuman monster out for blood. He's a human in a mask. And immediately after the demise of Drew Barrymore, we are introduced to the actual final girl, Sidney Prescott, who's played by Neve Campbell. Expectations for her were low, since with that final girl trope, they weren't final girls weren't necessarily useless, but as Kaden Burnett from the Women's Media Center explains, quote, "It was clear that they'd never seen a horror movie. They split from the group, followed the weird noise, and as Laurie Strode from the Halloween series did, stabbed the killer with a knitting needle and assumed that they were dead. For these girls, survival was something of a miracle, but with Sidney Prescott, she earned her survival. As Sidney fought back, she was able to outwit the villain on numerous occasions and always came out on top at the end. Audiences loved the change of pace and they flocked to theaters to witness this horror event of the year. And the movie was not only a critical success, it was also a financial success as well, with Box Office Mojo reporting a $173 million return on a budget of just $14 million. And that leads us to the impact that was felt post Scream and leading up to today with, that massive success. It led to a wave of the late 90s and early 2000 horror films such as I Know What You Did Last Summer, Valentine, Urban Legends, and Final Destination, which they all featured, like Scream, an attractive cast, witty dialogue, and killers that were rooted in real-world fears rather than supernatural mythology. These films, they mirrored Scream's formula, such as, the smart protagonist, the self-referential commentary, and then a sense that the characters actually watched horror movies themselves. Even more recent horror movies, such as Happy Death Day, which was released in 2017, and Freaky, which was released in 2020, also they have the essence of Scream in their blood as well. They blend the slasher violence with comedy in a way that wouldn't have existed without Scream, who first successfully, broke those rules. Nearly 30 years later, the echoes of Scream can be heard throughout the cinema. In the end, though, Scream wasn't just a movie, it was a revolution. It revived a genre that had become stale, and it injected it with new life and redefined what horror could be by breaking the rules, poking fun at cliches, and giving us characters who were smart, flawed, and just human. Scream set a new gold standard for slasher storytelling. So the next time that someone asks you, what's your favorite scary movie, just remember that there's a good chance that it would not exist without Scream laying its foundation.